In this screencast, you will be introduced to the nervous system. You may find information on the introduction to the nervous system in Chapter 11 of your textbook. In this screencast, we will be focusing on two very important learning objectives. The first will be to describe the overall function of the nervous system. The second will be to explain both the structural and functional organization of the nervous system. First, let's understand the function of the nervous system. The nervous system is often referred to as the fast control system of the body. It responds in milliseconds to stimuli or changes, and it exerts its influence by controlling the activity of muscle cells and glands. If you remember, effectors are muscles and glands. So the nervous system controls glands and muscles by controlling the cells that make up those glands and muscles. So how does the nervous system control all the other organ systems if it only really directly influences or controls muscles and glands? Well, recall that the human organism is composed of 11 organ systems. And those 11 organ systems themselves are composed of organs. And those organs are composed of tissues, cells similar in structure and function, and then those tissues, of course, are composed of individual cells. Pretty much every organ system contains muscles and glands. And so by controlling those glandular cells and those muscle cells, the nervous system is able to control tissues, organs, and ultimately organ systems. So the nervous system controls all the other organ systems by controlling the muscles and glands, which are found in all those other 10 organ systems. Let's talk now about how the nervous system works by looking at a, say, real life scenario. So you're driving to class one morning, let's say it's a Monday, and you are trying to get to your A&P1 class on time. And you're running a little late, not very late, but you're a little late. And you come upon a intersection and the light that was green turns yellow. And so now you've got a decision to make. Do you, one, stop at the light and wait for it to turn green, or do you hit the gas and try to go through the intersection before it turns red? This process that you would go through illustrates how the nervous system works. First, stimuli is detected. In this case, you determine or you detect that, oh, the traffic light has turned from red to yellow. You then take in that information along with other information such as, well, how late am I to my A&P1 class? Is there an exam today and I really need to be there on time, or can I be late and that's okay? How far from the intersection am I? Do I have my last traffic ticket fresh in my memory? How am I feeling in general about hitting the gas and going through this light? All of this information is going to be processed, or what we call integrated, by your brain, and eventually a decision is going to be made and action is going to be taken. Either you will stop at that stoplight or you will hit the gas and move through it. again, this process here, this very simple way of making a decision is something that illustrates how the nervous system works. The nervous system detects stimuli, changes, it integrates that stimuli along with like memories, experiences, other information that you have, right? And then a decision is made, and that decision is sent to muscles and glands, and action is taken. So that basic but real life scenario really illustrates how the nervous system works. Every component of the nervous system is involved in one or more of the following processes: sensory input, detecting a change, and then information about that change being communicated to the central nervous system, the brain and spinal cord. That information is then integrated. It is processed and sense is made of that sensory input. And then a command is sent out to muscles and glands, which we call motor output. So every portion of the nervous system is involved in one or more of the following processes: sensory input, integration, or motor output. So as I mentioned earlier, the nervous system is the fast controlling system of the body. It controls all of the other organ systems of the body, but it's not the only controlling system of the body. It partners with the much slower endocrine system. The endocrine system controls other organ systems by releasing hormones. And we'll be talking about the endocrine system in the coming weeks. Just again, to contrast the two, the nervous system is the fast controlling system. It reacts to stimuli within milliseconds versus the endocrine system, which reacts in minutes, hours, or sometimes for it to fully react can take a day or longer. So the endocrine system, by contrast, is referred to as the slow controlling system of the body. Let's talk now about how we classify the different components of the nervous system. We can classify the different components of the nervous system by their physical location in the body or their structural classification, or we can classify the components of the nervous system functionally by the role that they play. Are they involved in sensory input, integration, or are they involved in motor output? First, let's talk about the structural classification of the nervous system. And this is the classification that you are probably most familiar with. You've probably heard of the central nervous system. Well, what is the central nervous system? The central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord. It's called the central nervous system because it's located centrally in the body. So the central nervous system is the brain and spinal cord. So I want you to think brain and spinal cord, brain and spinal cord, brain and spinal cord. That is the central nervous system. Anything else outside of the brain and spinal cord is a part of the peripheral nervous system. So extending from the brain into different portions of the head, mainly the face and neck, are cranial nerves. They are outside of the brain proper, so they are part of the peripheral nervous system. Also extending from the spinal cord are the spinal nerves. And you have other structures such as these ganglia that, while close to the spinal cord, are definitely outside of the spinal cord. And then you have other nerves that radiate out into the upper and lower appendages, what are referred to as peripheral nerves. But the bottom line is all of these structures are outside of the brain and spinal cord, and therefore they are considered part of the peripheral nervous system. So the central nervous system is the brain and spinal cord. Everything else outside of the brain and spinal cord is part of the peripheral nervous system. So notice that the central nervous system is overwhelmingly involved in integration. And the peripheral nervous system is mainly involved in sensory input and motor output. Though there is some overlap between the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system in terms of those functions. So in other words, there are parts of the central nervous system involved in sensory input and parts of the central nervous system involved in motor output. Let's now talk about the functional classification of the nervous system. When we classify components of the nervous system by their function, we are classifying them by what they do. Are they involved in sensory input, or are they involved in motor output? And this involves mainly the peripheral nervous system. Sensors, such as the photoreceptors in your eye, can detect changes in wavelength or light intensity, which would allow you to see a glass of water. And then nerve fibers would communicate information about what was observed along nerve fibers to the brain. The sensors or receptors that detect the stimulus and those nerve fibers that send that information to the central nervous system would be part of the sensory or afferent division. And then we can subdivide the sensory or afferent division into the somatic sensory or the visceral sensory, depending on where the sensors or receptors are found that detected the stimuli. If those sensors are on the surface of your skin, detecting stimuli outside of the body, such as hot, cold, itch, pressure, etc., then the receptors and the nerve fibers are part of the somatic sensory division. On the other hand, if those receptors are, say, deep in your stomach and they detect changes in your stomach, such as pressure or pH, then those receptors and the nerve fibers are part of the visceral sensory division. Visceral referring to your visceral organs that are found deep within your ventral body cavity. So somatic sensory division include the receptors and nerve fibers carrying information from receptors in your skin and joints, and visceral sensory division includes the receptors found deep within the body in visceral organs, for example, and the sensory fibers carrying sensory input from those receptors. The motor or efferent division includes cells in the central nervous system that send commands out via nerve fibers out to your effectors. And your effectors, again, are your glands and muscles. So the cells and the nerve fibers that are basically sending out instructions to your skeletal muscles, your smooth muscles, your cardiac muscles, and your glands, they're part of the motor or efferent division. Now, toward the end of our discussion on the nervous system, you'll learn that the motor division is divided into two subdivisions as well. The nerve fibers that are sending motor output out to your skeletal muscles, which you can control voluntarily, are part of what's called the somatic motor division. The nerve fibers that are sending commands out to your involuntary effectors, those are the effectors that you can't control, such as your endocrine and exocrine glands, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscles. Those are part of the autonomic nervous system or visceral motor division. And you'll eventually learn that the autonomic nervous system is itself divided into a sympathetic nervous system and a parasympathetic nervous system. At this point, don't worry about sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. We'll discuss those subsystems at the very end of our discussion on the nervous system. At this point, know that the motor or efferent division includes nerve fibers that are sending commands to skeletal muscles and makes them part of the somatic motor division, and those nerve fibers sending commands out to involuntary effectors, glands, cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, they're part of the autonomic motor division. This is an image from your book, and it basically summarizes the organization of the nervous system. Here we have the structural classification or organization of the nervous system into the central nervous system, which is brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, which is pretty much everything else. That everything else is either involved in sensory input, so that would be your sensory sensors or receptors and the nerve fibers that send sensory input to the central nervous system. And we said that the sensory division can be subdivided into the somatic and visceral, depending on if that sensory input is coming from your skin and joints, or if it's coming from visceral organs, for example. And then if there's motor output being carried by nerve fibers out to effectors, they are part of the motor or efferent division. And if those motor fibers are sending commands out to your voluntary effectors, your skeletal muscles, they're part of the somatic motor division. And on the other hand, if they're carrying motor output out to the involuntary effectors, smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, glands, they're part of the autonomic nervous system. And later on, you'll learn that the autonomic nervous system is divided into the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. Again, don't worry about that right now. However, be able to summarize the remainder of this figure. It will help you understand the nervous system moving forward if you have a good understanding of how the nervous system is organized both structurally and functionally. Before ending, let's review the learning objectives of the screencast, describe the overall function of the nervous system, and explain the structural and functional organization of the nervous system.